Hey, I'm Brett, the out-of-home baker. I am working on a client cake today. This is for a customer, and I thought I would take a moment to show you how I structure it. Okay, so when it comes to cake and stacking it, I literally think whoever the first person to do this was probably insane because it's like we're going to take two of the softest things that are supposed to be soft. People want them to be soft, cake layers and buttercream, and we're going to stack it up like 50 pounds worth of cake and buttercream. We're just going to stack it, right? It's kind of insane. So when you're stacking a cake, whether it's a two-tier cake, whether it's a three-tier cake, even if it's a single tier and it's got a lot of layers, that starts to get really heavy and it starts to get really kind of precarious. And so you want to make sure you're doing two things when you're stacking a cake. The first, you have to make sure you're structuring it in a way that it supports its own weight. If you don't do that, you're going to have it all collapsing and sinking in on itself. The weight of those top layers is going to start to crush the bottom, and you're going to have sagging and you're going to have squishing. And there's this illusion that happens because when you put a cake together, you do it when it's cold, almost frozen. If you're not doing that, I highly recommend it. That is the best way to get these nice smooth sides and sharp edges and to get a nice crumb coat on it so that all the crumbs get locked in. You want your cake to be cold when you're decorating it. Tip number one. But what happens is when you're decorating a cake that's almost frozen, it gives you a false sense of security when it comes to structure, because those frozen cake layers, they're going to hold up the weight of the cake. But as soon as it starts to thaw, which you want it to be soft when you cut into it, and it's going to sit at a wedding or a birthday or a party for a while, and as it sits, it's going to thaw, and it's not going to be able to support that weight anymore. The frozen cake gives that kind of false sense of security that you've done it right. So no matter what, you want to put structure in the cake, in each of the tiers that are going into the cake, so that it can hold the weight of the cake that you're building up. That's the first thing, structure to support the weight. The second thing you need to make sure you achieve when you're doing a tiered cake or any tall single tier cake is you need to make sure it's not going to tip, because what's holding these layers together is not much. It's a little bit of buttercream. And buttercream honestly doesn't like to stick to cake very much because cake has a lot of moisture in it. And buttercream is fat-based, it's oil-based. Water and oil, they don't mix. They like to repel each other. So when you're stacking your cake, you have to make sure you're putting something in there to hold it all together. And what you should do in order to achieve this is a center dowel. A nice sturdy rod that's going to go through your cake and it's going to hold all of it together so that it doesn't tip. All right, so we're supporting the weight, number one, and then we're stopping it from tipping. We're going to keep it all centered. That's number two. I'm going to walk you through how I do that. So I'm making a three-tier cake today, and I'm doing it for a customer, so I've got my hat on, and I've got my gloves to keep it sanitary. This is a 10-inch cake. It's on the bottom. It's a 10-inch cake, and it's 4 layers. And just for clarity's sake, when I bake that, it's 2 10-inch pans that I bake. It's 3 batches of my typical cake batter, and then I cut those 2 cakes in half to give me 4 layers. And I do that because I like the height that it gives, and I also like the aesthetic that it gives when you cut into it. You get buttercream in all of those slices. And then for taste purposes as well, it gives you buttercream in every single bite. So this is a 10-inch cake, 4 layers. I'm going to put an 8-inch cake, also 4 layers on top of it. And then on top of that, I'm going to be putting a 6-inch cake, also 4 layers. We're going to start on the bottom. I'm actually going to move this off of my turntable because as I'm putting in the structural supports, I don't want it to swivel and move around on me. I want it to be nice and sturdy. So I'm just going to move this down onto my table. Move this out of the way for a second. So we need to make sure we structure this enough so that this heavy 8-inch cake can sit on top of it. And what I use to structure my cake are wooden dowels like these. It's just shy of a 1/4 inch thick, slightly smaller than a 1/4 inch. And I get these at Walmart or any local craft store, you can get them. We're going to be putting these in the cake, and we want them to go around the edge of where this 8-inch cake is going to sit. We don't want it to be farther out because then it's not actually holding up the cake. And we want it to be just kind of inside so that it'll hold up the sides. If you go too far in, that still leaves wiggle room for the cake to move back and forth as it gets soft and it can sink down. So we want it just close enough to the edge that it'll support all of that cake, but not too far out that it will miss the mark. So we've got these dowels, and to help us make sure we get them in the right place, I'm going to take my actual 8-inch cake pan. It's nice and clean on the bottom. And I'm just going to line it up on top of this cake. Both of these cakes have been chilled in my freezer for about 15 to 20 minutes. They're not check frozen. They're not solid frozen. And I don't recommend you decorate a cake completely frozen because of that thawing and that sagging that can happen. I do it kind of medium, like super cold but still pliable. So these have been chilling in the freezer, so like I can touch them. They're not soft or anything. They've been chilled. And I'm just going to line this up on top, and then I'm going to make a mark with my palette knife. This looks pretty even. Check it on all sides. Make sure that you've got it all around. I'm just going to go around and mark where that circle is, just slightly under this pan. I just want to get an idea of where that 8 inches is going to go. All right, I'm gently going to take that off. So now I've got a nice circle on top of my cake, kind of acting as a guide so I can see where I'm going to put my dowels. Now, one thing we want to make sure we definitely do before we start stacking these is we want to make sure the cake is perfectly level. If it's slightly off, if the frosting's slightly higher on one side or lower on one side, it's gonna start to go sideways and be more prone to tipping, and then it just won't look nice because it'll look like it has a lean. We want to make sure this is nice and straight and even. So I'm using a level. This is my cake level. I don't use one from the garage. This is specifically for cakes. And we're just going to place it on top and make sure that it's looking level. And I'm going to do it from a couple different angles to make sure it's not tilted on one side. It actually looks really good. What I would do if I found that it's not level, if the bubble is tilting one way or another, I would just start to add a little bit of frosting and kind of sculpt up my cake and get it to where it's level. You add a little bit on one side, kind of smooth it out and scrape it until it's nice and flat so that it'll hold up the next cake perfectly. So that looks pretty good. Now, when it comes to putting these dowels in, this is the rule of thumb. You use as many dowels in this cake as there are inches diameter in the cake that's going on top. So if we're putting an 8-inch cake on top of this 10-inch, I want 8 dowels in this cake, one for every inch diameter, in order to support the weight. That is the rule of thumb. If you do any less than that, you risk a cake that's not properly structured. So I'm going to take these. They're kind of long, and I know I'm going to be able to probably cut them in half. And so instead of using 8 dowels, I'm going to pull 8 dowels out from here. These are pretty long, so we're going to have to cut them down, and we'll use the other half to structure this cake. So let's start. I like to I'll pick a spot and I'll put it in, and I'm going just slightly inside where that circle was that I drew. It's about a 1/2 inch inside that circle because we don't want it to be right on the edge. We want it to be far enough under to support it, but we don't want it to be seen and we don't want it to poke out. So I'm just twisting it down through all of my layers of cake. I start with that one. I'm going to go straight across. Just kind of make a clock with my dowels. So that one goes in. Make sure it goes all the way to the bottom. And now I'm going to start going the other way. I'm going to make kind of like a square, like a box with these dowels. This is going all the way down, nice and sturdy. And then one across from there. There we go. And now I'm going to fill in the little gaps in between, starting here. It's funny, you know you've been making cake all day when you skipped meals and you haven't eaten and you get a little shaky because you're running low on energy. That is me today. So I'm just putting these dowels in. Ooh, there we go. You want to get them as straight as you can. That little guy was a little crooked. I do have, this cake is a turtle cake, so it's chocolate cake layers. It is vanilla buttercream, and then it's toasted salted pecans and caramel. So in each of these layers, I have these pecans that make it kind of hard to get the dowels in. I have to kind of just push it through and the pecans move out of the way. So there we go. I've got all these in. what I want to do now, I'm going to put it on my turntable now so I can actually move it around easily. We need to trim these down so that they're not as tall as the cake. So I'm going to pull up my pencil. Found my pencil. So I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to mark where I want to cut. And I want it to be like pretty even with the top of that buttercream and maybe even just the teensiest, tiniest bit higher. Because if it's any lower than the buttercream, then that means the cake is just going to be sitting on buttercream and it'll be able to squish. And I want to make sure it's the dowels supporting the cake. So I'm going to just make a light little mark on all of these right where it's meeting the buttercream. On all 8 of these dowels I'm going around. Okay. Now I've got my dowel cutters is what I call them. I actually don't know what the official name of these is. I just went to the hardware store and picked out something that was nice heavy duty cutting. So these cut like wires and small pipes and these will cut the dowels pretty good. So one by one, I'm just going to twist these out. I like to twist them so that I don't yank any of the cake up with it. I just twist it carefully out. And then I'm going to find that mark that I made, and I'm just going to cut right on that. So lining it up, cut. And this is going right back in, and you can use the other half of the dowel to push it back in where it's supposed to be. So we're going to go around the whole cake, and we're going to do all of the dowels. Finding that mark, trimming it, and getting it back in there. There's the mark. Now when it comes to structuring your cake like this, I want to point out that there are lots of right ways to achieve the same thing. And for every baker, it's your kind of job to find the way that works for you. Not everybody out there uses wooden dowels like these. Some people like to use the fat boba tea straws that there are, the really thick ones that are kind of sturdier. People like to use those to structure the cake as well. And I've done that method, and it worked on the cake that I did. Now, the reason that I prefer the wooden dowels is because I feel like they're a little sturdier. I'm always just a little bit nervous about those straws and about their ability to kind of hold up so much weight. And the wooden dowels don't bend at all, so I like them for that. The other thing I don't like is that I feel like the straws are kind of tricky to get out of the cake because you can't really grab them with anything. It's like you have to kind of get that slippery straw edge, and then part of the cake gets stuck in there, so it like takes a cross section of the cake out with it when you take them out. So honestly, it just comes down to personal preference. I've always done the wooden dowels, and I really like using these. And so this is what I stick with. But if you like using straws or want to try out straws, you can totally go for it. But the same kind of rules apply. Same thing about how many dowels to use, how many straws to use, where to put them. It's all going to be the same principles. You're just making sure you structure your cake no matter what you're using. Cool. All right, I'm going to pop it back off the turntable again, just so that it doesn't swivel while I work. And now that all of these dowels are in, you can see them right there, we're going to be putting this 8-inch cake on top of our 10-inch. So we need our spatula. This is going to go underneath. And I'm just going to use my palette knife to add a little bit of buttercream, nice fresh soft buttercream on top of this. I'm going to kind of seal up where those dowels are. And this is just going to be a little bit of glue to hold on to our cake. Go all around the circle, just adding a little bit of buttercream so that our cake can stick to it. And you don't want those crumbs to get out. Don't let those little crumbs get out of your circle. You want those to hide underneath. All right, move these out of the way so you can see. What I'm going to be doing next is just sliding this spatula underneath my chilled 8-inch cake. Now it's chilled, so I should be able to handle it pretty well. And this is just going to go underneath on one side. So this cake right now, it's on a cake board that's that's 10 inches, and then underneath it, it's got an 8-inch board that's cut down to size so that it'll hide. So I gotta get my spatula underneath that 8-inch board. I'm just gonna slide it around. It's underneath the board, sliding it around, loosening it from this other cake board that it's on. The reason why I use two is for ease getting it in and out of the freezer as I'm working with it. I'm gonna pick that up. And now I've got my line that I drew, and I'm just gonna line it up nice and easy. And I'm sliding it. Now before I slide out my spatula, I'm just gonna check it, make sure I got it pretty even. I'm gonna scooch it back just a little bit. And I'm sliding that spatula out. Okay, now I'm gonna show you. As I pulled it out, it just pulled off a little bit of the buttercream right there. Not a problem, we're gonna fix that. We're gonna add some more buttercream and we'll get it all smoothed out again. Before I get my 6-inch cake out, we're gonna dowel this 8-inch cake in the same way. Got my 6-inch cake pan. We're just gonna put this on top and we're gonna mark where our dowels are gonna go. All right, lining that up as good as I can. And just drawing a nice light line underneath the pan. There we go. All right, that gives me a good template for where we're going. So I'm going to use these dowels that we already cut in order to put them in the cake. Yeah, they're going to be just tall enough. So this is an 8-inch cake. On top of it is going a 6-inch. So we're going to put 6 dowels into this cake. I'm going to start with one just right on the inside, pushing it all the way down. I'm going to go right across. There we go. Now 6 dowels is kind of hard because you can't just go right across. You kind of have to eyeball these other two. So I like to take both of them and kind of mark where they're going to be on the circle and then shove one in at a time. All right, and then these two right here. There we go. There we go. And this cake layer has the pecans as well, so I can feel that. All right, I'm just gonna mark these without the turntable this time. I'm holding my hand steady, just giving it a nice little mark where it's supposed to be cut. All right, slowly and carefully, I'm just gonna twist these out. And this is good to note that if you put a dowel in that's pretty short and it starts to get really close up to the cake, it's hard to pull that out. So these, I can grab these pretty easy because they're still poking above the cake. But if you get really short, it's so hard to pull that out. So make sure you're using dowels that are the appropriate size when you're putting them in and when you actually do insert them for the final time in the cake. If you get the size wrong and you put it in, it's really hard to get out. I just had that experience with a friend the other day. I was helping her structure her cake and we cut the dowel just slightly too tall. I don't know how it happened, but it was too tall and we went to put it in and it was just barely above the buttercream on the top of the cake and we were like, shoot. And it took a lot of finagling to get that dowel out and we had to kind of retouch up the top of the cake. It was kind of a fun disaster and we figured it out because that's the beautiful thing about cake is it's really more forgiving than you think it's going to be, and there's a lot of ways to fix tiny little mistakes like that. It's a lot like sculpting. When you have a problem or when you mess up, you can just add buttercream to it, take buttercream away, kind of sculpt it, and you can fix a lot of typical mistakes that happen. All right, we've got 3 more to go. I'm just twisting each of these out. This layer also had pecans, and so I can feel those kind of crunching as I put these dowels in. Right on the mark. Going back in. As you're pulling these dowels out, it pulls some of the cake crumbs with it. So just make sure you don't actually accidentally drop those on the cake. And if you do, just take a little pointed dowel or a toothpick and you can just lightly dab those off. I can already see I had one that fell right here. I'm just going to snag him with my dowel. All right, one more to go. There we go. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to clean up some of this trash, make sure that it doesn't end up on our cake, in our cake, or anywhere near it. And now I'm going to go get my 6-inch to go on top. It's just chilling in my freezer, and we're going to pop that on top. All right, got my 6-inch. I'm going to give my tools a good wipe. You want this to be nice and clean before you stick it under. That is super key. As you're trying to get these nice smooth cakes and sharp edges and make them look really good, keep your tools clean. Wipe off your scraper, wipe off your spatula. Keep them clean, and that'll help you get the look that you want. It's a good secret. All right, I'm just gonna put a bit of buttercream and glue on top of this 8-inch. And while I'm doing that, let's talk just a little bit about the scariness of delivering cakes in general. Because if you're like me, it's kind of terrifying. And I've delivered hundreds of wedding cakes and birthday cakes, and it never really ceases to have a little bit of stress and anxiety. But there's a couple of things that can help you with success, and part of it is this, structuring it. And there's some cake designs like the one I'm doing today, and the way that I'm dropping it off, it needs to be assembled beforehand. Sometimes, like with wedding cakes where there's a venue and a kitchen, and it's a simple design, you can deliver it as separate tiers in your car, and then you can stack it on site when you get there. Now there's pros and cons to both sides. When you deliver it fully stacked, it's a little bit nerve-wracking, right? But you get the wonderful convenience of doing it alone in your kitchen. You've got your freezers, you've got all your tools, and you can pop it in and out of the freezer as needed to touch things up. And it makes it a little bit more private. When you stack things on site, you always get a bit of an audience. You become kind of like the party pre-show. And I don't always like that. And you don't always have access to the fridge that you might need. You know, after delivering it for an hour or however long, things start to get soft and it gets harder to work with. So if there's not a freezer, if you don't know the venue, then sometimes it's good to just take the risk away and stack it before you deliver it. That being said, it's also good to know your route. If you're going up any crazy hills or bumps or gravel roads, you know, you might not want to deliver it stacked because that just might be too much anxiety for you to handle. Chances are the cake will be okay, but you will be a hot mess. And so I do that. If I know I'm going up a crazy hill, I will just make plans. I will communicate with my customer about my plans to deliver unassembled and to assemble on site. For example, this weekend, tomorrow, I am working on a cake that I'm taking up a ski lift. It's a 4-tier cake and it's going to go up a ski lift. And so I'm delivering it as separate tiers. I'm not going to do the whole stacking and doweling until I get there. But I do put in the structural dowels before I leave because I can do those ahead of time. So I put in those structural dowels. I take it as the separate tiers. And when I get there, I assemble it and I put the center dowel in. So let's stack this. I'm gonna line it up nice with that circle that I drew. And before I pull my spatula out, I'm just checking it, making sure it's nice and aligned. And now I'm just gonna pull that out. All right, I'm gonna give it a little press down. I want it to really kind of stick to the other one. And because it's chilled, it's safe to do this. I should know I'm working with American buttercream today. I've worked with Swiss before, same techniques apply. In fact, you get nice, sharp, smooth edges with that Swiss buttercream. But also, as you can see, you can do it with American buttercream. It just depends on what your taste preferences are and what your customer's preferences are. And sometimes it depends on what you're allowed to do as a home baker in your state, because different states have different laws regarding what ingredients you're allowed to use. And with the license that I work under, I'm not allowed to do
like meringue type egg-based things, because as those sit out, they present a microbiological threat. So that's a whole other can of worms that we'll definitely talk about in the future. But you'll want to be aware of safety and just what your customers' preferences are in what buttercream you use. Okay, now that this is stacked, before I put it on my turntable, I want to put that center dowel in. So here it is. Here's my center dowel. It's another dowel that I just got at Walmart or any craft store or hardware store. This one is about 3/8 of an inch thick. So it's thicker than these other ones. For comparison, there they are. So we're going to take this center dowel and we're going to stick it through the whole cake. Now underneath each of these tiers, they're all on a cardboard round, just like the ones that I pulled them off of when we took them off that cardboard. Same thing, that's what they're on. So it's thick enough to support and hold up the cake. I like the grease resistant ones so they don't get soaked and soggy. But if we sharpen our dowel nice and good, it's going to go right through the center. So I've got just a plain old sharpener. I'm using the fat end. I'm just going to sharpen this to a point. And this is a pencil sharpener that is used only for cake, not for crayons, not for pencils. There's no other contaminants in there. It's strictly for cake dowels. So I'm going to get a nice sharp point. Now, when it comes to doing this, again, there is more than one way to get the center dowel in there. This is the method that I prefer. Some people like to have pre-cut holes in the supports in between in those cardboard rounds. They like to have a hole already stamped out and they kind of build it up on the dowel. Now, the reason why I don't like doing it that way is because you have to line things up perfectly. And it's a lot of just focus to try and do that. And I'm not a fan of it. So I like that I can get it nice and right this way and then stick it in. But it can be kind of scary doing this for the first time, sticking the whole dowel through the cake. So I hope that it's going to help as you watch me do it. Now I've got it nice and sharp to a point. And I am going to line it up right in the center. And we're going to just twist it down. I like to kind of twist it so that it eases it in kind of like a screw, and I'm going to twist it through each of those cardboards. And then I'm going to push it all the way down into this thick cake drum that I have on the bottom. This is about a 1/2 inch thick. I ordered it off Amazon, and I want this to go down into it a little bit so that it will hold it onto that cake drum. That's kind of the base that's holding it all together. So here we go. I'm just putting it right in the center. And then I'm going to poke it through, and I'm just going to twist it down. Now, these cakes are soft. They're not chuck frozen, but they are chilled. And so it does take a little bit of effort. I just hit that first cardboard round, so I'm going to give it a good twist and some good muscle, and they went right through. So I'm twisting it down, nice and careful. It does take a little bit of pushing, and don't be afraid to push. There it goes. Went through that second one. It just broke through right here. Going down, going down. Guess what? I forgot to trim it. And I'm so glad that I caught this on camera, because it's awesome to show you that even people who teach, even people who have done it for so long, make mistakes. And I did exactly what I was telling you before. I forgot to trim the dowel down, and so now it's too tall above the cake, and I'm gonna have to twist it out again so that I can cut it and get it to the right size. And I'm going to show you that whole process. Something that I love as a home baker and as a business coach, I love being transparent. So here we go, my friends. We're going to pull this baby out because it just went through all of my cake and it's too big. So I'm just twisting it like a screw. I'm going to back it back out of the whole cake. In fact, I might even just back it up partly and cut it where it is. All right, because I can start to see right here where it came out. I can see that line. I want it just slightly under there because I want it to hide underneath the cake. Let's talk about what I should have done and what I didn't. Normally what I do when I'm not filming and I'm not a little bit nervous on camera is I take this dowel and I line it up. I hold it up right against the cake like that, and I see where it's going to hit. And all I do is I take a pencil and I mark it right where it needs to hit. Usually just a little bit under where the top of the cake is, and that's where I mark the dowel, right? So we mark it and I cut it, and I don't cut the sharp side off. You want that sharp side to go down into the dowel. So make sure that you're measuring it from the the top of your table and not from the top of the drum, because you want it to go down into the drum. So you measure it from there, sharp side down, and then you cut it. And after you cut it, then you put it down into the cake. I missed that stuff. I'm so glad I caught this so I could show you. I love that. So I'm just gonna pull out a little bit, and I'm gonna cut it with my dowel cutter right here, rather than untwist the whole thing. Now I've got one shot at this. If I cut it still too high and I push it down and it's still just a little bit above the cake, then I'm gonna have a harder time getting it out. So I'm gonna aim a little bit lower. I'm just gonna grab that with my dowel cutters and give it a good squeeze. There it goes. We got it off. And now if any of those little wood pieces maybe got on your cake, just snag them up with a toothpick or with your dowel. It looks like I'm good, I'm clean. I'm gonna finish pushing this back down. Go back in there. Now you should feel it hit the drum, and you should be able to push it all the way into your cake drum. Okay, it's in there, we did it. I love it, I love it. It really doesn't matter how long you do this, something happens, and it's okay. And you know what else I just realized? Is I didn't hit record on my mic. So if my sound changed, I'm really sorry about that. But this video is more important than getting it perfect. That's my policy. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna put this on my turntable because we need to seal these cracks, and we need to fix that little gap that came off, and we need to fill this hole. I'm gonna put it on my turntable. And now it's nice and heavy. Just gonna slide it on there very carefully. All right, now what I've got is, I've got 2 bags, and I just use Ziploc bags for this because I'm only using a little bit of frosting and I didn't want to waste a full bag. But normally, if you're piping, do not skimp on the piping bags. Don't use Ziploc bags. They're the worst. They pop so easy. They're not easy to handle. So invest in some good piping bags. But just to fill these gaps, I'm going to use these to get the frosting on there. I'm going to start at the top, and we want to fill this hole that our dowel made, because there's a nice hole from where we push that in, because now it's sitting somewhere down here. We're going to fill that up with buttercream. So I've got my pink, the same color. I'm just going to shove it down there and fill it up really good. All right, and now I've got my handy dandy little palette knife. This is my favorite palette knife. It's got like a square edge, and so what it ends up being is like a tiny little mini scraper. And I'll show you how I use that, but I'm just gonna touch that top very lightly, and it's nice and chilled still, so it kind of smooths itself out. And then I can even touch it up later, like let this kind of set and chill, and then add a little bit more to it and smooth it out some more. Give that a little bit more and just kind of smooth it out.
It's funny, when we're trying to do these smooth sides and sharp edges with buttercream, we get so up close with our cakes that we see every little imperfection and we get so hung up on it. So there's a point where it's like, it's okay. You gotta back up and see it as a whole and not get so hung up on the tiny little air bubble or tiny little hairline that's still there. It's all right. You're the only one who's seeing it, I promise. I'm just gonna take my pink and I'm gonna put it right up against the cake. And I'm just squeezing buttercream right into the little crack. Just right in that crack so we can seal it up. Now this is where, please don't, Ollie. Not right now, okay? Did you make me another card? Will you go show it to Daddy? Thank you. Now this is where this little square edge spatula comes in handy, because I can hold it right up against my cake just like a scraper. It makes a 90-degree angle, and I'm going to be able to just scrape that crack. In fact, I'm going to move myself so that I'm over here. I'm just going to hold it up against the cake, and it's just going to seal that gap so nicely. And I might go around a time or two, smoothing it out. And just being nice and gentle. Probably go around once. Now you kind of want to work a little bit speedy because your cake is cold. Your buttercream is going to chill really fast. So if you let it sit for too long, it's going to just kind of get hard and it'll be harder to smooth out. So I'm just going around with my little scraper spatula, blending it and smoothing that little gap. All right. And I feel like this is one thing that really sets your cake apart as like a good professionally done cake. If you can seal up those gaps really nicely and make it just like so seamless, it really says a lot, I think, for your craftsmanship. So I'm just going around sealing that up and it's starting to look really good. Nice, 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 nice. Give it one more spin. Okay, now that we got the top one done, I'm going to do the second one. Now this one's a little trickier because it's pink on white. So I'm going to fill it with pink, but then I'm going to make sure I scrape off with my scraper so that there's not leftover pink there on top of the white. I'm just going to squirt where it really needs it. We're going to get that big old hole. Remember that guy? Let's fill that up. The rest of it's looking pretty good. I'm just going to add just the teensiest bit around. There we go. Same thing. Just going to take my little palette knife scraper guy and start to go around. Oh, that's looking so nice. Now, one thing I feel like I'm going to have to do with this bigger chunk that I have to fill is pop it in the fridge and let it kind of set and then keep working with it, just because it's starting to get a little bit soft. Like, that's a lot of buttercream to fill in, and I just want to make sure that I can smooth it out right. So I'm just carefully kind of covering up that spot. And also, this can be the back of the cake. We should be able to get it to a point where you can't even tell that it was a thing. But if you're concerned about it, you can make it the back of your cake. And hopefully you didn't have a big chunk come off like I did. It's kind of like a serendipitous thing that happens. You never know. All right, it's looking really good. I'm just going to scrape off some of that pink that got onto the bottom there. Just gently grab it with my palette knife. I'm just going around and just very gently scraping that off. The cake is still nice and chilled down there, and so it's not so hard to grab it. See these little pieces right here? I'm just going to grab it and scrape it off so gently so that it doesn't make a mark. It just takes off the pink. This is like my favorite little tool. You've got to get one of these. All right, now that this has kind of been sitting on the cold cake, I'm going to give it another go and see if it's chilled enough to kind of touch it up. And it is. It's feeling it's feeling a little firmer right there. So I'm just going to add a little bit more. I'm just going to kind of sculpt over that little chink that I had. All right, there it is, just slowly working with it. There we go. There you go. Can't even tell that there was a piece missing. Nice. So that is how you structure a 3-tiered cake, including a little bit of troubleshooting if you ever go wrong. So when I deliver this, I'm going to stick it in the back of my car. I actually have a foam box that my husband helped me build. We taped it all together, and it has a tunnel, a tube, the kind of tube you see on the back of a dryer, and it connects to my AC. And that pumps the cold air back into this foam box to keep my cake nice and chilled during delivery. And then I just take it nice and easy. But I've delivered 3-tier cakes like this as far away as 2 hours, 3 hours. I've gone over bumps and hills and the biggest of dips as I'm coming into venues. And they have lived, they have survived to tell the tale. So that's it. I hope this has been super helpful for you as a home baker or as any baker trying to learn the ins and outs of cake decorating. And if it has been helpful, help pay it forward and help make this video findable for other bakers who are trying to learn. You can do that by subscribing to this channel, by liking this video, and you can also connect with me on Instagram. My page is at the Out of Home Baker. The handle @ and the Out of Home Baker. You can find me there, and I share a lot of daily tips and tutorials and trainings and help for home bakers to be able to do what you love, make a living, get clients, and grow a thriving home baking business. You can connect with me there. Thank you so much for joining me, and happy baking, my friends.